The auction block was set up behind the saloon, shaded by a warped canvas sheet flapping loose in the wind. Dust carried the scent of sweat and spilled beer. No horses that day, no cattle either, just a single woman standing barefoot on splintered wood, eyes lowered, hair tangled from the road. Her dress clung like wet paper from a creek crossing the night before. They said her husband had wagered her in a poker game, then tried to sell her when he lost. No one stopped him. Folks in Dry Creek knew how to look away. It wasn't the kind of town that asked questions when men dragged women behind barns, or when a man with a loaded rifle said she belonged to him, but someone did bid. His name was Silas Mercer. He hadn't spoken much since the war, not since he came home with half a leg gone and the other half restless as a gun barrel. He owned 3,000 acres, 40 head of cattle, and a mansion built of redwood hauled from Oregon. They called him the Phantom Rancher because he never came to town unless it was necessary. Today it was. He said one word when the bidding started: 100. The saloon went quiet. The poker player Redden, a man with a gut like a whiskey barrel and fists shaped for hurting, spat and laughed. She ain't worth that much. Hell, I'd pay you to take her off my hands. I ain't bargaining, Silas said. The gavel came down. He took her without ceremony, didn't even glance at Redden. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just followed with her arms wrapped around herself like she'd forgotten she had a body. Her name, they said, was Lark. They rode north in silence. The ranch sat like a scar at the base of the burnt hills, one wing of the main house folded into itself from a fire years ago. No wife had lived there since Silas returned from war. No woman had crossed the threshold since his mother died. Lark stood on the porch and waited. He didn't touch her, didn't give her orders, just handed her a key and nodded to the room at the end of the hall. "You don't owe me," he said. She didn't answer. At night she heard him pacing, not on the wooden floors, on the stone porch out front, where a man could feel the night air and pretend he wasn't being watched. She sat behind the curtain and watched anyway. He was younger than she expected. 35 maybe, hands like fence posts, a limp that spoke of shrapnel, not birth. By the third night she cooked. He didn't thank her, he didn't ask her name. But he ate everything on the plate and left the kitchen door open when he went outside. That was how it began, not with kindness, with space, with silence, with the first crack of something that had been frozen long before either of them met. The mornings were early and unrelenting. She worked without being asked. The house was half-rotted in places, the wind always creeping in through warped planks. She patched them. She scrubbed until her hands bled. She mended his shirts, though he didn't notice. One day he found her in the barn, bleeding from the palm, struggling to lift a feed sack. "You don't have to earn your keep," he said. "I'm not." He looked at her. "I'm taking back what's mine," she said. He didn't understand, not then, not until she began to stand straighter, speak louder, take up more space in the house. It wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. A woman who had been stripped of her name, her rights, her voice. Now she was building it back, plank by splintered plank, and he watched. He didn't stop her when she started tending to the books in his study. She didn't ask permission when she cleaned out the locked cabinet where his father's rifle was kept. She even burned the chair where Redden had sat once, years ago, leering during a cattle deal. She knew it without being told. "You burned it," Silas said that night, his voice unreadable. "Yes." "Why?" It remembered something ugly. He didn't argue. He watched the fire eat it, let the past turn to ash. A storm came a few days later, the kind that scours the world clean. Rain pounded the roof and rattled the windows. Silas stood outside to watch the lightning. She came to the door. "Are you trying to get struck?" He didn't answer, just raised his face to the sky like a man begging to be taken. She walked out into the rain barefoot, grabbed his hand. He didn't pull away. "You're not a ghost," she said. "I don't feel alive." You are. He looked down at her, rainwater dripping from his hair. You still think that in the morning. I'll still be here. The next day she was, and the day after that, but things do not stay still on the plains. Not when blood has been spilt, not when men like Redin still walk free, not when the ghosts of war and fire haven't been buried deep enough, and not when a woman learns how to stand. Autumn came like a knife. The wind sharpened, the cattle grew restless, and Lark began riding the perimeter fence with the ranch hands. Silas didn't stop her. He watched from the ridge as she handled a horse like she'd been raised in a saddle. No one asked her where she learned, no one dared. The men respected her, not because Silas had bought her, but because she didn't flinch. Not when a calf broke its leg and had to be put down. Not when a rattler coiled near the well and she killed it with a shovel. Not when a drifter spit at her boots and called her filth and she stared him down without blinking. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the men listened. One night she came in late, her skirt stained with grease and dirt, her eyes narrowed from the wind. "There's a break in the southern fence," she said. Silas rose from the table. "I'll ride out." "I already did." He studied her. "That's Comanche land. They don't come north this late in the year." "That's not a certainty. I wasn't asking permission." There was a flicker in his eyes, not anger, something older, something brittle. He wasn't used to being challenged. But he wasn't the kind of man to snap either, not unless provoked. "You were always like this?" he asked. "No," she said, "but something broke. I don't bleed like I used to." He didn't press. Later that night, she found a book left open on her bed. A page marked with a scrap of torn cloth. A poem about salt wind and forgiveness. He never mentioned it, neither did she. Trouble came in the form of hooves, 3 riders. Redin and 2 others. They showed up at the gate like wolves wearing grins. They didn't ask to come in. They waited for someone to challenge them. Lark came out with a rifle balanced on her hip. "You're not welcome," she said. Redin grinned. "Don't need an invite to check on old property." "You sold me. Man can change his mind. You lost the right to breathe near me." One of the riders chuckled. "I don't see your keeper," Redin said. "You think he's gonna shoot me over some rag he bought at the saloon." "He doesn't have to," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that came from fire, not fear. "Get off this land," she said. They didn't move. Then a shot cracked through the trees. Bark exploded inches from Redin's ear. Silas stood on the roof with a long rifle. "You want to test how many rounds I got?" he called. The riders backed up. But Redin smiled like a man who'd only just begun. "You think this ends with 1 bullet?" he said. Silas didn't answer, just chambered another round. The 3 turned and rode out slow, not fleeing, measuring. That night Lark sat by the fire with a pistol across her lap. "Don't wait for me to be afraid," she said. "I'm not," Silas said. She glanced at him. "I'm waiting for them to be." The quiet didn't last. 2 weeks later, one of the ranch hands didn't come back from his ride. They found his horse limping back with blood on the saddle. They found him strung from a tree, boots missing, eyes swollen shut. On his chest, a card. "This ain't over." Silas buried the man himself. Lark stood beside him without tears. She didn't cry anymore, not for others, not for herself. That night she asked him where he kept the maps. "What kind of maps?" "Everything terrain, water routes. Trade lines, where the old mines used to run." Silas brought them down from the attic. She spread them across the table like a general before war. "They're watching," she said. "They're testing what we'll let them do." "And you mean to answer?" "No," she said, "I mean to end it." He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed in the firelight. "You ever kill a man?" he asked. She looked at him. Does leaving him to die count? Yes. Then once. He nodded, then you know it stays with you. Good, she said, let it. They trained in the dark, not just Lark. The younger ranch hands too. Silas dug out old army gear. He hadn't taught since the war, but the muscle remembered. How to shoot in the wind, how to move in silence, how to lay traps for men who hunted without honor. Lark was a natural. Her hands never shook, her eyes never blinked. The other men followed her lead. She found out where Redden was hiding, a hollow just east of the old canyon road. She scouted it herself, didn't tell Silas until she came back. I want to go alone, she said. No, it's mine. You're not a weapon, he said. Yes, she said, I am. They argued in whispers, but in the end he followed her into the dark, just far enough to watch. She took out 2 of Redden's men before they knew she was there. She tied the third to a tree with barbed wire, left a message carved into his chest. I am not your wife, I am the reckoning. When she returned, Silas was waiting by the fire. You done? He asked. She sat beside him. No. He poured 2 glasses of rye. Good. He didn't kiss her, didn't reach for her, just sat in the quiet, and she let herself lean against his shoulder. The first time she let herself need anything in years. But love, when it comes like this, is not gentle, it is not soft, it is forged from scar and shadow, and it does not ask permission to grow. They didn't know it yet, but they had already begun to heal each other. And it was far from over. Winter did not arrive with snow, but with silence. The ground froze underfoot, hard enough to break a horse's leg if you weren't careful. The cattle huddled close to the ravine for warmth, and smoke from the chimneys curled thick into the gray sky. Lark kept to her routine. She repaired saddles with stiff, cracked hands, hauled water when the pipes froze, read every ledger in Silas's office, memorizing debts, names, routes. It wasn't about learning to belong, it was about learning to defend. Silas watched her work like a man watching the edge of a storm, not afraid, just waiting. They didn't speak of what had passed in the canyon. She hadn't told him what she whispered into the last man's ear before he bled out. He hadn't asked. But something in her gaze had changed since that night. Sharper, colder, she didn't mourn what she had done. She mourned that it had taken this long. He'd begun limping worse, favoring the wound from the war. She noticed, brought out a brace she'd found in a storage trunk. You wearing this might stop you from falling off the porch like an old man, she said. Is that your version of concern? No, it's my version of not dragging your broken body inside when it happens. He wore the brace. She saw him smile for the first time. It looked foreign on his face, like a wound healing wrong. Letters began arriving in town, unsigned, warnings. The Mercer place is a grave waiting to be dug. The whore and the cripple think they're safe behind a fence. The sheriff brought one out to the ranch. Could be nothing, he said. Lark read it. It's not. The sheriff shifted, uncertain how to look her in the eye. You got enemies, ma'am. I don't have the luxury of friends. Silas took the letter and burned it, but the threats didn't stop. One night the barn was set aflame. The youngest ranch hand lost 2 fingers trying to save a colt. The fire didn't reach the house, but the message was clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about erasure. They wanted her gone. They wanted him ruined. She began writing again. Not letters, maps, timelines, routines, who left the ranch and when, what routes the wagons took, who was missing from town on the days the threats appeared. The ranch hands started checking in with her like she was the foreman. Some didn't even notice the shift. Silas did. You ever command men before? He asked. I commanded myself. He nodded. That's harder. They spent nights at the table together, talking through plans, defense lines, reinforcements. How to funnel the herd into the canyon if needed, how to hold the house if it came to that. She moved into the room across the hall from his, not because of fear, but proximity. Because if the house burned again, neither wanted to be too far from the other. The attack came in the dead of night. 10 riders. They didn't knock. They didn't shout warnings. They lit torches and came in from the east, guns already drawn. But the ranch was ready. Traps laid weeks ago took down the first 2 horses. Screams split the dark. The cattle stampeded downhill, triggered by fire near the lower pens, just as Lark had planned. She took the rifle and climbed to the upper loft. Silas stayed on the porch. He didn't run, didn't hide. He stood in plain view. Redden rode at the front. He had new scars now, one eye half closed from the canyon ambush. But his voice was still smug. You always were too proud, Mercer. Thought you could buy silence. I didn't buy her, Silas said. I made space for her. She's a curse. You'll both rot. You're scared of her. Redden's grin cracked. I don't fear whores. You should. That was when Lark fired. She aimed for the torch in his hand. The flame exploded, splashing oil across his coat. Redden screamed. The other riders scattered, firing blind into the dark. Silas didn't shoot. Lark did 1, 2, 3, each shot deliberate, no hesitation, the rest fled. When dawn broke, only Redden remained, half burned, half conscious. Tied to the same tree his men had used for the ranch hand, she stood over him. He croaked out a laugh. Think this makes you something. No, she said, it makes you nothing. She raised the pistol, but Silas came up behind her. Not like this. She stared at Redden. His mouth was wet with blood, his hands blackened. I don't want to be better, she said. Silas didn't argue, he just laid a hand on her shoulder. Then be done. She hesitated, then pulled the trigger, once, not for pain, for ending. The sheriff arrived hours later. By then the barn was ash. The field was soaked with blood. The sheriff looked around. You all right? Silas nodded. We're alive. The sheriff studied Lark. That true. She looked past the bodies, past the fire. No, she said, but I'm not dead. And that, for the first time, was enough. She and Silas stood together in the rubble, not as strangers, not as broken people, but as something else, something forged and still changing. Spring came slow, the kind of slow that made you question whether it was coming at all. The ground thawed in patches. Green pushed through the blackened field where the barn had once stood. A new calf was born with its ribs showing, half dead from the cold, and Lark nursed it back with a wet cloth and warm milk until it found its legs. She didn't name it, she didn't name anything she might lose. The ranch was quieter now, too quiet. Some of the hands had left after the fire. Others stayed but carried the weight of it in silence. No one spoke Redden's name. No one asked where he'd been buried. Lark had done it herself. A shallow grave in the north woods where the coyotes didn't hesitate. She hadn't told Silas. Some things she still kept to herself. He didn't push. He was healing too, though he didn't know it. He walked further each day, stood straighter. The brace helped, but it was more than that. The weight in his shoulders had shifted. He spent more time with the herd, less in the study. He'd begun carving again, little things, scraps of cedar shaped into wolves and hawks. She found one by her window one morning, a bird mid-flight, its wings crooked but rising. She didn't say anything, but she kept it in her pocket. The town began talking, not to their faces, of course, but in backrooms and barber shops and church pews they whispered, about the woman who killed men like she was born for it, about the rancher who let her stay, about the fire. About justice, about curses. Lark didn't care, she hadn't come here to be liked, but she noticed how the shopkeepers took longer now, how the butcher didn't meet her eyes. How the schoolteacher, widowed young, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and warning. Only the blacksmith spoke to her plainly. You done surviving yet? he asked one morning, handing her a reforged stirrup. She stared at him. What? Most people get through hell and forget how to stop fighting. She didn't answer, didn't know how. She started riding out alone again, not to scout, not to hunt, to remember. She followed the edge of the canyon, where the wind cut raw across the stone. She sat by the creek where she'd hidden the first night Silas brought her here. She walked to the grave under the cottonwood tree behind the property, his mother, she'd learned. And one night she found Silas there too. He didn't speak when she approached, just moved over on the bench and let her sit beside him. You come here often, she asked, when I don't want to forget where I came from. Do you? Sometimes. Do you? Lark looked up at the sky, where clouds moved without hurry. I remember everything, she said. That's the problem. He nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out a flask. He took a swig, then offered it. She drank. It was rye. Harsh, real, she didn't cough. A letter came weeks later. This one wasn't a threat. It was from a widow east of the ridge. Her land was being bought up by a cattle company, pressured, threatened. The law wouldn't intervene, said it was just business. She heard what Lark had done, begged for help. Lark read it twice, then set it down. I'm not a savior, she said. No, Silas said, you're something worse. She smiled. They rode out at dawn. The land was dying, brittle fences, thin cows, a boy with a split lip hiding behind a chicken coop. The widow was younger than Lark had expected, pretty in a sun-worn way. Her eyes were cracked with worry. I don't need violence, the woman said, just presence. You're asking for reputation, Lark said. She nodded. They'll back off if they think there's blood behind my fence. Lark turned to Silas. Stay here. You're not going alone. I don't want him to think I'm hiding behind a man. He didn't argue. She rode into the cattle company's camp with her coat open, pistol at her side, said nothing at first. Just stood there long enough for the foreman to come out of the tent. He laughed when he saw her, then he saw her eyes, and he stopped. You're Mercer's girl. I'm no one's girl. You threatening me? No, she said. I'm remembering what men like you look like before they bleed. The next day the company pulled out. No guns were fired, no bodies dropped. Sometimes silence is its own war cry. When she came back, Silas had repaired the front porch steps. They creaked less now. He didn't ask what she said to the foreman. She didn't ask why the house suddenly smelled like cedar again. But that night she sat closer to him by the fire, and when he brushed her hand, she didn't move away. They didn't kiss, not yet, but in the quiet something passed between them, a permission, not of ownership, but of recognition. She wasn't who she'd been when he found her barefoot behind the saloon, and he wasn't the man who had bought her to feel something again. They were becoming something new, and neither of them could name it yet, but it felt real. The rains came in early summer, heavy enough to wash out the lower trails. The river rose, thick with silt and the bones of trees ripped from the hills. Lark stood at the edge of the floodplain, watching debris carry past like the world had decided to shed its old skin. The ranch held barely, 2 fences broke. A calf was lost in the current, but the house stood and the hands worked double shifts in the mud. Silas was out with them, shoveling, hauling, directing the younger boys when their boots got stuck to the knees. He moved slower, but no one dared suggest he rest. Lark rode upstream on her on that morning. She wasn't watching the river. She was looking for tracks. 2 nights before, she'd found a knife wedged in the barn door. No note. Just a blade, rusted and crude, with a rag tied to the hilt. It was an old sign from another life. She followed hoofprints to the high bluff where the river veered hard against the stone. There, beneath the shadow of the ridge, were 3 men sitting by a low fire. She didn't approach, not yet, watched, listened. They weren't after the ranch, they were after her. Names came and went, hers among them, spoken low with the edge of unfinished business. The kind of talk men do when they don't think they'll be overheard. They weren't bounty hunters. They were worse. Ghosts from before Dry Creek, from the time before Reddin. One had called her the runaway girl from Candle Ridge. She hadn't heard that name in years, didn't know it could still be used like a blade. She rode back without being seen. Her hands shook only once on the reins. She let them. Then she buried it, like she always had. That night she sharpened every knife in the house, not because she expected to use them, but because ritual was steadier than sleep. Silas watched her from the doorway. "You're expecting something," he said. "They know my name. I know your name. Not the old one." He waited. She didn't speak for a while. Then, when I was 16, I killed my father. The words sat in the room like dust after collapse. Silas didn't move. She kept sharpening. He sold me to a trader in Candle Ridge. Said it was my fault my mother died. Said I was debt. Silas said nothing. I slit his throat the night before the deal, took his horse, burned the cabin, never looked back. She stopped, wiped the blade. They were part of that trade. Silas stepped forward slow, not reaching, not crowding. "You want them gone. I want them to know the girl they remember is dead. Then I'll ride with you." She looked up. "No, this one's mine." He didn't argue. But in the morning, his rifle was already in the saddlebag. She didn't stop him. They found the camp again at dawn. The men were still sleeping, or pretending to. One rolled over as she stepped from the trees. His hand slid slow toward his belt. She shot him in the wrist before it got there. The scream brought the others up fast. 2 rifles raised, one lowered when they saw her face. "You," the second one said. "Hellfire, we thought you. You thought wrong." The third one moved to circle, but Silas stepped from the brush behind them. "Rifle up, steady." "Don't," Lark said. "Let them look at me." They did. They saw the girl they'd thought was meat. The girl who rode like a man and shot straighter than one. The girl who now bore no softness in her eyes. One of them dropped his gun. The other spat. "You ain't better than us," he said. "No," she said. "I'm the proof you lost." She didn't kill them. That would have been too clean. She made them walk, stripped of horses, boots, food. Told them Candle Ridge had no place for men like them anymore. When they were gone, she stood over the fire pit. Silas handed her a match. She burned it all. Back at the ranch, the air had changed. Something inside her had shifted again, less weight, maybe, or more. She walked through the kitchen like she owned it now, not as a guest, not as someone owed safety, but as a woman who had built it with her bare hands. That night, Silas came to her door. He didn't speak, just looked. She opened it. They didn't rush. They undressed like people who'd survived fire. His hands were scarred, so were hers. Neither hid them. When they came together, it wasn't gentle, but it was real. It wasn't redemption. It was recognition. He held her after. She let him, and for once she slept. By midsummer, the land had begun to forget the fires. Wildflowers returned in yellow bursts across the ash fields. The new barn stood taller than the old one, framed by fresh pine and nailed steady by hands that had once carried rifles. Lark had insisted on no loft. Too many places to hide, she said. She trusted light, open angles, solid ground beneath her feet. The ranch was no longer a haunted place. It had become something else, not sanctuary, not yet. But rooted, earned. She rose early now, before the others, her boots already laced when the rooster called. She drank coffee black. She no longer flinched when she heard the wind through the shutters. She no longer kept the pistol under her pillow. It stayed on the table beside the bed, untouched. Silas had begun to walk without the brace. The limp remained, but it didn't slow him. He carved her another bird, this one whole-winged, mid-dive. Left it in the kitchen where she'd see it first thing. She said nothing when she found it, just ran her thumb along its back and slid it into her coat pocket. That afternoon, she rode into town alone, not for supplies, for something older. She walked into the courthouse, laid a piece of paper down, and signed her name in ink. Lark Ruth Mercer. No ceremony, no preacher, no dress, just a name taken by choice, not law, not love, but legacy. A month later, the sheriff came riding up the hill, hat in hand, face full of apology before he'd even dismounted. "There's someone asking about you," he said. Lark stepped onto the porch. "Name." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "She says she's your sister." Silas stood in the doorway. He didn't speak. Lark's face didn't change. She took the name like a stone in the mouth, heavy, real. She walked down past the fence line, toward the traveler's cart parked at the edge of the field. The woman stepped out, dusty dress, hardened eyes. The resemblance was faint but there, same jaw, same way of standing like they were ready to bolt. "Didn't know where else to go," the woman said. Lark nodded. "You still hate me?" her sister asked. "No," Lark said, "but I remember." She didn't offer a hug, didn't smile, but she stepped aside. "You can stay one night." The woman hesitated, then nodded. "That's enough." That evening, Lark didn't eat at the table. She sat on the back porch, watching the sky bleed into dusk. Silas joined her after a while, whiskey in hand. "She's not here to hurt you," he said. "She's not here to fix anything either." "No one can," he said. She looked at him. "I didn't think you'd understand that." He shrugged. "I've buried things too." She leaned against his shoulder. They watched the sun vanish behind the ridge. Coyotes howled in the distance. Life carried on. By fall, Lark had begun teaching one of the younger boys to read. She did it after supper, by lamplight, with a patience no one had seen in her before. Not softness, just certainty. The ranch had grown, not larger, but deeper. The people who stayed understood it now, understood her, not as a legend, not as the woman Silas bought, but as the one who held it all together. Silas built her a room of her own, attached to the house but facing the hills. All windows, cedar floors. She lined it with maps, shelves of books, a rifle above the door. He didn't ask what it was for. She didn't offer, but it was hers. Entirely. The last Sunday of the year, a storm rolled in fast and black. The cattle were already sheltered, the hands huddled inside. Silas found her out by the north fence, oilskin coat snapping in the wind. "You trying to drown?" he called. She turned to him. "No," she said, "just remembering what it felt like to survive something." He walked to her, slow. "Feels different now." She nodded. "It used to feel like crawling. Now it feels like standing." He took her hand. They walked back to the house together. That night no ghosts stirred, no dreams came, only the sound of rain against the roof. The sound of a house no longer holding its breath. They buried the past out there, bit by bit, not with shovels. With every breath taken free, with every morning they rose and chose not to run. She was no longer a woman someone gave away. He was no longer a man hollowed by what war forgot to kill. They were what remained, what healed, and what refused to be burned again.